Joining me until 7 is my panel. We've got Aaron Bastani, the co-founder of Novara Media, and Benedict Spence, writer and political commentator. Now, Aaron, we'll start with you. I mean, going through what Keir Starmer had to say in his New Year's address from Downing Street, by the way, which was sort of a robot Starmer, and he admitted that many people are finding it hard to think about the future, but promised to fight for change. Have a watch of this. Oh, I can't hear it. Oh, right. Well, the audio, I think, was a bit missing on that one, but probably for the best, my friends. Here's Kemi Badenoch.
Happy New Year. Like all of you, I am looking forward to a 2025 that is full of hope, security and prosperity. The Conservative Party is also going through a period of change. This process of renewal will be a long-term project. Things may be bumpy along the way, but the party I now lead is going to do things differently. Watch this space.
All right, so there's Kemi Badenoch's Christmas message, short but sweet, you might argue. The Reform leader Nigel Farage said that his party's focus on family, community and country included this.
I got back involved with politics, took the leadership of Reform UK, and I made one big promise. I said in that general election, albeit with 4 weeks to go, we'd get millions of votes and we'd establish a bridgehead in Parliament. Well, that is what we have done. And I think everybody acknowledges that with just a handful of MPs, we've made a real impact over the course of these last 6 months. And everything we do is based on values. And those values are around the things that matter to us: family, community and country. They're the things that got me back in politics.
And that's from Blenheim Palace, beautiful backdrop. But for for fairness here, Stephen's messaging, so glad Starmer was muted then. I do have to be fair, we will play Sir Keir Starmer.
Many people, it's hard to think about the future when you spend all of your time fighting to get through the week. So I want to be clear, until you can look forward and believe in the promise and the prosperity of Britain again, then this government will fight for you. A fight for change that will define this year, next year, and indeed every waking hour of this government.
All right. Aaron, come on. You must admit that that was not inspiring at all, was it?
No, I would just say, actually, purely on the visuals.
Yes.
Allow me to be incredibly banal.
Let's go on the aesthetics.
Let's just, Dominic Cummings had that great line, then he said, turn the volume off and what do you think? And that's actually how most people could consume a lot of news media. Looking at that, I think Labour and the Tories should be terrified, because if you didn't know who these politicians were, if you were just an alien from outer space and you're looking at those three things and you were told one of these people is the leader of a country, you'd think it's Nigel Farage. You look at Starmer there a moment ago, very poorly lit, cramped, indoors. He looks alienated from the country. Farage is beautifully lit. It's actually a very well-made video. Great backlighting, great backdrop. You're making a statement, like you say, Blenheim Palace, home of the Marlborough family, including Winston Churchill. That is a real statement of intent. And look, we've had new parties arrive in British politics that do quite well. The SDP in the 1980s, the Greens, UKIP. This is a very different beast. And I think the best thing you can say for Keir Starmer is that Kemi Badenoch is also not particularly inspiring. She uses that word project. I think of Eric Ten Hag at Manchester United. You're going nowhere fast.
That went well. Yeah, Benedict, come on. Which one caught your fancy if you had to choose?
Yeah, it was clearly Farage. I mean, quite aside from the production values, the fact that he was wearing a suit with his tie done up was a really good start.
Well, to be fair to Kemi.
I mean, no, the leader of the Conservative Party wearing a bright red dress. I mean, come on, like really basic things like this. Just turn up like you look like you want to be the leader of the country. That would have been a fantastic start. Keir Starmer is a good 20 years behind the rest of the country. They clearly still think they're sort of stuck in the Blair open collar sort of era, and where everything's very casual, even though it's the middle of winter. Nobody's buying that.
Do you not think there is, because a lot of the criticism around Kemi Badenoch is that she's been missing from the battlefield. Do you think actually this approach of a sort of a submariner is actually, it's laudable because she's coming up and devising policy?
Like a sort of a German U-boat strategy. She's just going to turn up and sink you from nowhere.
Exactly.
I mean, you have to sink somebody at some point for that to actually work. I think she's very evasive because I think the Conservative Party doesn't actually know what it stands for yet. It doesn't know what its audience is going to be going forward. It doesn't know where, I think, Reform is going to mainly sort of concentrate its fire, whether or not it's going to try to kill off the Tories at this general election, or it's going to sort of focus more on going after Labour, or sort of a combination of all of these things. And it's also very cautious because if you offer any kind of policy as a Conservative leader at the moment, Labour can very easily, or the Reform can very easily turn around and go, that sounds nice, why didn't you do that over the last 14 or so years? So I think Kemi, to be fair to her, is in a very difficult position where most people, even though she wasn't actually in charge of the country, would go, we just don't buy what you're selling.
I mean, Aaron, if Reform really are looking prime ministerial with Nigel at the helm, are we going to be seeing Novara Media reports on how Britain is a country of hate or something, are we?
Watch this space as Kevin I'll respond to that. I think the point is for Farage, and I know it upsets lots of people on the radical right, is that he is tending to the centre quite a lot, actually. Not necessarily in rhetoric all the time, sometimes, but often in some of the policies he's talking about, actually.
But I think that's what we're doing here at GBNews. But you fellas, you disagree with that.
There you go. Well, no, so for instance, he thinks that nurses shouldn't have to pay student fees, their debt should be scrapped. He talked about, actually, the two-child benefit cap with regards to universal credit, etc. Should get rid of that. That is stuff that actually, you'd get agreement from Jeremy Corbyn on the left of the Labour Party.
But Suella Braverman agrees with those positions.
Yeah, well, so that's what's really interesting about this particular moment, is that, and it's going to be a real challenge for the left. Farage is a very smart man. He knows he cannot be this insurgent figure on the radical right if he wants to become, who knows, Prime Minister, in a cabinet, leading a government of some kind. He knows he's got to get country-file Conservatives and a few Labour voters too. That's a big, big challenge.
Well, I think the Labour voters are more likely, actually, because I speak to everyone in the Red Wall. Well, not everyone in the Red Wall, but
you have been very busy,
exclusively in the Red Wall, almost. And what they say to me, Benedict, is, look, I'm not political at all, but I tell you what, Farage all the way.
Nigel Farage is a fantastic campaigner. That's not news to anybody. What I worry about with Reform is it's still in its embryonic stage. It could go in multiple different directions. And we actually saw this with both UKIP and the Brexit Party, is that a lack of professionalism can really do it a great disservice. And also, if you're campaigning on one thing, say immigration, you can get a lot done. But that's not a large enough policy platform to actually enter office, and other parties will start to nick stuff from you. There needs to be more in terms of a policy platform. We're still a long way away from the next general election, obviously. But it needs to stand on its own 2 feet, and it needs to be recognisable as a reform policy beyond. And they will say that we've already come out with this stuff, but actually most people know they don't like migration on the scale that it currently is, small boats in particular, and they'd like us to pay less tax. It needs to be more than that. And the other thing is the professionalisation of the party. Right now, it's just Farage. Tice is good. Rupert Lowe's good. Beyond that, there's not really enough there to go, yes, I trust these people to run a government.
Before May, that's the key test. All right, Benedict, thank you very much, and Aaron there as well. Now, Rowena's just messaged in saying, watching your political topic, my husband just said, why does it have to be left or right? What's wrong with common sense? What a very intelligent comment. Yes, I agree, Rowena. And Mark says, Reform are very often accused of being a right-wing party to the right of the Conservatives. In actual fact, some of Reform's policies would not be considered right-wing at all and would fit in with what would have traditionally been considered a Labour platform. I think Reform takes a pragmatic view that will appeal to both Conservative voters and Labour voters. I agree, Mark, and I think actually you might find that Aaron Bastani very soon becomes one of the 160,000 I'm looking for members of the Reform Party.
I was going to say, was that Nigel Farage? That's exactly the sort of thing they want to hear, isn't it?
All right. Now, the Conservative government's focus on small boats crossings and delays and asylum claims played a role in stoking August UK riots. That's not my words. They're the words of the chair of the Commons Equalities Committee. Her comments come as the official figures from 2024 show illegal immigration numbers are up almost a third And the total number of small boat arrivals has topped 150,000 since 2018. So does she have a right, or are people justifiably angry that migration simply isn't under control? Aaron Bastani and Benedict Spence still join me now. Benedict, I'll start with you this time round. Do you think actually there's any justifiable rhetoric to say that this was all stoked up by those who are anti-immigration? But I read that actually there were a load of foreign nationals who were tweeting up the fake news.
I mean, is it right-wing to point out that there's a lot of migration in this country and that might cause issues? I mean, you know, if you're just going to look at it on a sort of a purely practical level, if you don't have the level of investment in this country that we've needed for some time, and you're importing large amounts of people in at the same time, and you're not keeping pace, therefore, with services or with infrastructure, is that necessarily a right-wing thing to point out, especially if that's going to affect many of the poorest people in society? I would have thought that that could be as equally left or right. I suppose where people would say it is right-wing is going to come from that idea of, I suppose, a sort of an ethno-nationalist sort of sense of what Britain should be, which I really do think is very much a small minority in this country. I don't think it is quite as large as The Guardian would like it to be. But it will get bigger if you continue to just ignore people's complaints about these things. And broadly speaking, I think Fraser Nelson's been writing about this, I think he wrote about this possibly in his last Telegraph column, about how Britain is, relatively speaking, a success story when it comes to integration. Now, there are plenty that would dispute that, and I think that he was rather, well, this is the thing, he was, I think, not entirely accurate, rather sweeping, but, columns can be rather sweeping. But it's certainly not the worst place.
Said a similar thing.
It's certainly not the worst place in terms of integration in Europe. So is it, something driven entirely by right-wing people? No, I don't. I think that there are genuine concerns that a lot of ordinary people from across the political spectrum have, and I think it does a disservice to the debate that it is the default response to just go, that's right-wing, therefore we can put it in a box.
Shut it down, exactly. Aaron, I mean, you, I think, like to be open-minded. Are you open-minded to the idea that it's not a left-right issue?
Well, I think that's certainly true, that if you don't have enough infrastructure, new homes, and you have, this is now legal migration, net migration of circa 1 million people in 1 year, then that is absolutely going to create problems. You can be pro-immigration, whatever, doesn't matter. It's going to create problems with regards to certain public services, like healthcare, housing, etc. On this particular story, so for instance, it's gone up again with regards to undocumented migration in 2024, on 2023. The highest year was 2022, it was about 45,000 people crossed the channel. And correct me if I'm wrong, that was also the year of the 900,000 to 1 million net migration. Yeah. The average Conservative voter cares about migration, right? That's just a fact, it's an observation. How on earth did they get 24% in the last election? Almost 1 million net migration, 45,000 people in 2022 crossing the channel.
Yeah, it's a betrayal.
Well, I just don't understand how you can be a Conservative voter who cares about that stuff. Again, I'm just trying to be, a political commentator, being, objective, and then go and vote for them. It's like being a socialist. You want public ownership. A Labour government comes in, they're promising all of that, and then they privatise loads of stuff, and they're expecting you to still vote for them. I don't think any sensible person would. So, like I say, I'm kind of surprised the Tories kept so many votes at the last time of asking. I suppose the big question is, does that feed through to 2029? Could it go lower, is the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, it could go lower. And I think that's, reform, I think, came out of nowhere, really, and it's a lack of brand recognition as much as anything that I think that held them back. In many ways, actually, you could say that they probably should have done, as you say, slightly better. And people also don't really trust Labour on the issue of migration. They blame, I think, Tony Blair for opening those floodgates.
Do you remember Ed Miliband's controls on immigration mug?
Yeah, I do. Strangely, amongst the few things that I do remember of Ed Miliband. It's, this is, again, though, it's to go back to what we were saying in the last segment about Kemi's complete lack of actual position on anything. I don't think the Conservative Party really knows what it stands for, what it wants to appeal to. Because you're right, there is a disconnect at the heart of the Conservative Party, which is it's supposed to be very pro-free market. But how do you then square that with millions of people who are furious at the, frankly, rather pro-free market policy of opening the floodgates to anybody who wants to come and work here? Those two things aren't compatible, where you go, yes, we're absolutely driven towards competition, but we are going to exclude millions of people to come here and potentially, compete and drive wages lower. So how does the Conservative Party square that? But also, frankly, how does Reform square that? Well, because Reform is very much pro-free market party, but it's very anti-migration as well. It's difficult circle square.
Well, they would argue that, they're pro the nationalisation of British Steel, for example, right? So they would argue that there is a lot of their platform which isn't a...
So they'd nationalise British Steel and then bring in lots of workers from overseas to work at very low wages to staff it.
That. But we shall see. We'll put that question to them very soon indeed. All right, Benedict, thank you very much, and Aaron there as well.